To become the most powerful person on earth, Empress Irene had to commit the ultimate act of betrayal. She traded her only son's eyesight for the title of Basilius. Witness how she shattered centuries of Roman law, exchanging the love of a mother for the absolute authority of a god emperor. She gained the Roman Empire but lost her humanity, proving that absolute power requires absolute sacrifice. The story of Irene is not the story of a woman who ruled, but of a system that tried to make her temporary and the chain of decisions she made to stop time. She entered an empire where law and custom treated female power as a stopgap for male succession, where generals could veto theology, where the church could crown rebellion with sanctity, and where every proclamation had to be backed by soldiers who could switch sides overnight. Her rise is a series of forced choices: how to turn religious war into political armor, how to outmaneuver rival Caesars who had legal standing and armed friends, how to survive the moment her son became old enough to demand her disappearance, and why. A single act inside the Purple Chamber detonated the Roman world, breaking the line of legitimacy so completely that the West declared the throne vacant and built a new empire on the claim. Rome's crisis begins with a beating. In 799, Pope Leo III is seized in the streets by local rivals, men with knives, accusations, and a plan. They attack his body as a legal argument, trying to blind him and cut out his tongue. Because a pope who cannot speak cannot command, and a pope who cannot command can be replaced. Their charges, misconduct, perjury, are less important than the outcome. A pontiff stripped of legitimacy in front of a city that has learned to treat popes as removable. Leo escapes, but escape is not security. He needs a protector strong enough to intimidate Roman factions, close enough to act, and legitimate enough to make the protection feel like law rather than occupation. Byzantium, the Roman Empire in the East, should be the obvious answer. It is also thousands of miles away, tangled in Balkan and Arab frontiers, and ruled by a woman whose authority is contested even inside her own palace. So Leo makes a calculation with empire-level consequences. He sends messengers north to the Frankish king, Charlemagne, military muscle within marching distance, and a ruler who can make Rome's streets obey through fear. But alliance requires ideology. A king cannot simply become emperor without a story that makes it lawful. Leo and his circle seize on a loophole that is half legal logic and half political weapon. The Roman imperial throne is vacant because the person occupying it is female. If imperial authority is defined as male in Roman custom and Western interpretation, then the title in Constantinople is not truly filled. If it is not filled, Leo can fill it. On Christmas Day in 800 in St. Peter's, the public signal is unmistakable. A crown placed on Charlemagne's head before a divided elite. The papacy trades recognition for protection. The West trades the old Roman line for a new Roman claim. And the fuse that allows this is not Charlemagne's ambition alone, it is Irene's existence. To understand why a pope can call the imperial seat empty while an empress sits on the throne, the story has to rewind to the machinery of the East. Law, succession, and the fear that a woman in power is not a ruler, but an emergency. In the 8th century Roman Empire, women can hold influence, command wealth, and even act as regents. But the system treats their authority as borrowed, valid only as long as it is used to deliver power to a male heir. A woman can be a bridge. She is not meant to be the destination. Irene is chosen precisely because the court believes she will behave like a bridge. She arrives from Athens, from an elite family with connections and prestige that can be marketed as respectable and Greek without being entrenched in Constantinople's factional clans. That outsider status is a risk. She lacks inherited networks in the capital, but it is also her opening. Outsiders can become the solution to problems insiders cannot touch. In 769, she is brought to Constantinople and married to Leo IV, the heir of Constantine V. The marriage is a political instrument. It binds a fresh noble line to the ruling house. Irene learns fast what the palace rewards: obedience in public, leverage in private, and an instinct for who feels threatened. Then the empire forces its first irreversible turn. Leo IV dies in 780. Their son, Constantine VI, is a child. The throne is suddenly a room full of adults, staring at a crown that cannot defend itself. A regency is not a neutral caretaker arrangement. It is a prize fight conducted with documents and daggers. Irene becomes regent, and everyone around her knows what she risks losing. If she is pushed aside, she does not simply return to private life, she becomes a liability who can be confined, tonsured, or killed for stability. The first threats are inside the dynasty. Constantine V had raised other sons, men granted high titles, including Caesars who have legal status, court friends, and the kind of names soldiers can chant. For them, a child emperor is an opportunity, and a woman regent is an insult they can frame as rescue. Rescue the empire from female control. Rescue the law from embarrassment. Irene's decision is brutal in its clarity. She cannot negotiate with men whose best future requires her removal. She must isolate them before they can gather military backing. Plots emerge, and she answers with staged authority. Arrests, forced vows, public humiliations that tell the court what disagreement now costs. When a rival is made to submit, it is not merely punishment, it is a broadcast. The point is not the man, the point is the audience calculating whether loyalty is still optional. But coercion alone is unstable. Irene needs legitimacy that is not simply fear, because fear collapses the moment the army finds a better bet. She needs a cause that recruits belief, because belief can outlast a palace coup. The empire hands her exactly that cause, icons. For decades, imperial policy has been convulsed by iconoclasm, the question of whether holy images are acceptable devotion or idolatry. This is not a theological seminar. It is a struggle over who controls the sacred. Emperors who want to discipline the church, monks who claim spiritual authority, and populations whose daily devotion is being policed. Irene recognizes the political geometry immediately. Iconoclast policy has enemies, especially among monks and many urban believers. If she becomes the protector of icons, she gains a network that cannot be reduced to one regiment or one minister. Monasteries can mobilize opinion, shelter allies, and condemn opponents with moral language that makes rebellion look like piety. Her choice reframes her regency. Not a woman borrowing power, but a ruler restoring order between heaven and empire. She moves toward an ecumenical council to reverse iconoclast decisions and bind the empire to a new consensus. But even this religious act hits the hard wall of military reality. In 786, an initial attempt to convene the council in Constantinople collapses when iconoclast troops, units, stationed near the capital, push into the proceedings and force it to disband. The message is direct. Theology will be decided by whoever controls the soldiers in the room. Irene adapts with a ruler's instinct for structural constraints. If the local troops are the veto, she changes the troops, she engineers transfers, brings in more reliable forces, and relocates the council away from the capital's volatile garrisons. In 787, the Second Council of Nicaea meets under conditions she can manage. Bishops debate, vote, and issue decrees restoring the veneration of icons. The council is a physical anchor of legitimacy, a formal record that can be cited, copied, and defended as universal church order. And Irene gains something more valuable than a decree, a coalition. Monks and iconophile clergy now have a stake in her survival. To overthrow her is to threaten the settlement they just won. The alliance reaches beyond the empire too. The papacy, often uneasy with Constantinople's control, welcomes the restoration of icons. For Irene, this is diplomatic armor. If the Bishop of Rome recognizes her religious program, it becomes harder for rivals to depict her as a usurper without also stepping into accusations of impiety. For a time, the strategy works. The empire has a child emperor, a regent who can claim God's favor, and rivals who hesitate because the church now has a side. Then the child grows up. Constantine Zix reaches adolescence and begins to demand what the system says is his by right, the full imperial power his mother is holding. That demand is not personal, it is structural. A regent who does not step aside becomes, by definition, a usurper. Irene's problem is that stepping aside is not a clean retirement. If Constantine rules alone, she becomes a symbol around which dissatisfied factions can rally. She has seen what happens to inconvenient symbols. She has used those methods herself. So the relationship becomes a contest disguised as family. Every document Constantine signs, every general he promotes, every courtier who starts visiting his apartments more than hers. Each is a shift of power that reduces Irene's margin for survival. Constantine makes his move in the language the empire respects, control of the army. He tries to assert himself, and for a brief moment the balance tilts. Irene is pushed aside and confined. The court watches to see if the region has finally become what the system always wanted: temporary. Then Constantine reveals the weakness that will cost him everything. He does not build an unbreakable coalition. He faces military setbacks that stain his legitimacy, and he triggers religious outrage when he divorces his first wife, Maria of Amnia, and marries Theodote. This Mohian controversy is not gossip, it is ammunition. Clerics who had tolerated him now have a moral basis to resist him. Irene, who built her power by wrapping herself in religious settlement, recognizes the opening. Her son is giving the church reasons to doubt him. She returns to the center of government. Titles are adjusted. Oaths are rewritten. Constantine, desperate for stability, accepts a share of power with the very woman who has every incentive to eventually remove him. By the mid-790s, the empire becomes a court of double meanings. A council meeting is not about policy, but about counting who stands behind whose chair. A military promotion is not a reward, but a test of loyalty. A sealed letter arriving from a provincial commander is not news, but a vote. And now the stakes harden into a single question: will Irene relinquish power to her adult son, or will she destroy him to keep it? Roman political culture provides a method that is both ancient and chillingly practical. An emperor is supposed to be physically whole, capable of leading armies, standing in ceremony, embodying divine favor. Mutilation is not merely cruelty, it is disqualification. It makes a rival ineligible without creating a martyr through execution. In 797, Irene chooses the point of no return. In the Porphyra, the purple chamber associated with legitimate imperial birth, her agent sees Constantine the. It is a location that matters because it is a claim. The room that certified his right will now be used to erase it. He is blinded. The act is calculated to do more than remove a son. It is meant to terrify the decision-makers around her into submission. If an emperor born in purple can be mutilated by his mother, no general, minister, or court noble can pretend their own safety is protected by rank or tradition. Constantine's fate after the blinding is debated in sources. Some imply he died soon after from the injuries. Others suggest he lived in confinement for a time. The uncertainty does not soften the political result. Living or dead, he is finished as a ruler. The imperial line has been severed by a hand that was supposed to protect it. The court absorbs the lesson. Disagreement is no longer a manageable risk. It is a life-altering gamble. Now Irene confronts the final barrier, the empire's language itself. A female ruler can be titled Basilissa, Empress, especially as consort or regent. But Irene needs something stronger than a feminine variant that implies proximity to male authority. She needs the title that means the system itself has accepted her as sovereign. So she does something as radical as any battlefield victory. She adopts the male title Basileus. This is not semantics. It is a claim that the law must bend. A basilissa might be tolerated as a placeholder. A basileus demands obedience as the source of law. Coins and documents carry the signal outward. The empire is ruled by a woman who refuses to describe herself as temporary. She also leans into a logic her act of blinding has created. If Constantine is incapacitated, then the throne cannot be said to be securely occupied by him. Irene positions herself not as a mother guarding a son's rights, but as the only functioning sovereign capable of ruling. The system that once dismissed women as vessels is now confronted with a hard administrative fact. Someone must command. Someone must sign orders, pay troops, negotiate tribute. In Constantinople, that argument can be made to work because it is backed by control of the palace and the terror of what happens to those who miscalculate. In the West, it detonates to Frankish elites and the Roman clergy, a woman styling herself. Basileus is not a clever adaptation. It is proof that the imperial order has broken its own rules. That is the opening Pope Leo III needs. If the imperial office is defined in masculine terms, then a woman on the throne can be framed as a vacancy, a gap in legitimate Roman authority, and into that gap steps Charlemagne. The coronation of 800 is not just a papal favor, it is a redefinition of Roman continuity. It asserts that Rome's imperial legitimacy can be transferred, not inherited from Constantinople. Irene, by breaking patriarchal succession in the most literal way possible, gives the West a pretext to declare itself the new center. There are later rumors and hints reported in some sources that Irene even considered a marriage alliance with Charlemagne, a union that would theoretically heal the split by joining titles. Some historians treat it as plausible court-level exploration. Others see it as hostile gossip meant to portray her as desperate or un-Roman. Either way, the political meaning is the same. Once the West creates a new emperor, Irene's government is forced to deal with an unprecedented rival claim, whether through diplomacy, denial, or imagination. But even an empress who can blind an emperor cannot blind the economy. To keep Constantinople calm and the palace secure, Irene relies on policies that trade long-term stability for short-term survival. She spends to pacify the capital, reduces certain burdens in the city, and leans on imperial generosity as a substitute for universal loyalty. The structure of her reign becomes transactional. Keep key groups paid, keep the church aligned, keep the court frightened. Outside the capital, the math is harsher. Military pressure continues on multiple fronts. Tribute and diplomacy become tools to buy time, but buying time costs money, and money must be raised from taxpayers and provinces that do not benefit equally from palace spending. Every concession to one constituency creates resentment in another, especially among officials and soldiers who believe the empire is being managed for court politics rather than frontier survival. Irene has achieved something almost impossible: sole rule in a system designed to deny it to her. But she has done it by teaching the ruling class that legitimacy is flexible and violence is negotiable. That lesson does not remain loyal to her. It becomes available to anyone who can seize it. In 802, the backlash crystallizes inside the palace itself. Ministers and officials, men whose careers depend on predictable succession and reliable payment, decide that Irene's rule is too costly, too unstable, and too vulnerable to external humiliation. They organize a coup and elevate Nikephoros, the finance minister, as emperor. The physical act is familiar in Byzantine history: a sudden shift of guards, a closed-door decision that becomes public fact, a new name proclaimed while the old ruler is isolated before loyalists can gather. The empire does not politely vote Irene out. It moves the levers that make authority real and leaves her with no battlefield to stand on. She is exiled, first to the Prince's Islands near Constantinople, then to Lesbos. The woman who made emperors and unmade her own son dies in 803, stripped of the court that once trembled at her orders. Yet Irene's defeat does not erase what she proved. She demonstrated that imperial legitimacy could be rebuilt through religious coalition, that an ecumenical council could function as a political weapon, and that titles could be forced to accept realities they were designed to forbid. She also demonstrated the cost. When a ruler teaches elites that law is pliable and family is expendable, those elites learn to treat the ruler the same way. Her legacy is therefore not a morality tale about ambition. It is a structural turning point in medieval power. In the East, Irene's reign hardened the lesson that the emperor's body and the emperor's fitness could be engineered, that disqualification could replace execution, and that palace rule was a contest of coalitions more than a line of blood. In the West, her very existence as Basilius helped unlock a second Roman Empire, one crowned by a pope rather than inherited from Constantinople, accelerating the long divorce between Greek East and Latin West. Irene seized the masculine crown by breaking the rules that protected every ruler from the people closest to them. The consequence was not just a new sovereign, but a new behavior. Popes learned they could manufacture emperors. Courtiers learned they could remove them, and the Roman world learned that legitimacy was not a birthright. It was a claim that survived only as long as others were too afraid, too invested, or too divided to challenge it. Welcome to the Epic History Tales channel. Subscribe to the channel if you want to watch the similar video.